let's go to kind of the core of today's lesson, Isaiah 58. Look at verse 6. That's the first marker I want to show you on biblical fasting. It starts, earlier in verse 3, he's talking about fasting. In verse 5, he's talking about fasting. But in verse 6, the Lord starts teaching. And this is what he said. Is this not the fast that I have chosen? And then look at this marvelous list of things. Many people have never even read this passage. And yet this is the most beautiful description of what God wants in our life. He said, Israel, I'm married to you. And my purpose of marrying you is you're supposed to, remember I showed you the map, how Israel's right here, Asia's here, Europe's there, Africa's down here. All the Asian caravans came through Israel. All the European caravans came through Israel. All the African caravans came through Israel. Everybody came through Israel in trade. It was the hinge. Today, all the migratory birds do the same thing. Israel's one of the greatest spots for watching, for ornithologists, for migratory birds. Over 60% of all the migrating birds of Asia, Europe, and Africa fly over Israel. It's amazing when you go there. When you go there with Steve, you go up to Lake Hula, you go up to the Sea of Galilee, you look up, quack, quack, quack. It just seems like there's a superhighway of birds always going over and roosting and nesting and whatever they do. That's what Israel is supposed to be. As people migrated with their trade across to Israel, they were supposed to be fasting. Now remember I told you 2 days ago, this kind cometh not but by fasting and prayer. And I wrote up here, fasting is denying self and prayer is seeking God. Anybody remember that? Hold your hand up. Oh, good. Good. So we should pay attention to this. In the New Testament, Jesus told his disciples, there's certain things in your spiritual life you will never be able to understand and have unleashed without fasting. How many of you have heard a sermon about fasting in your church, wherever you go, home, here, in the last year? Anybody? Fasting. Good. 1/13 of you. You know what that means? 7%. That's high. Most people never hear a sermon on fasting. Do you know what we talk about? Dieting. We want to get skinny, right? Or we want to lower our cholesterol. Or, you know what I mean? We want to detoxify. It's not this. Look what happens when you understand self-denial. See, it's the fast I have chosen, God says, to loose the bonds of wickedness. When Jesus said, this kind cometh not but by prayer and fasting, it was about a boy totally controlled by a demon. Do you guys have demonism in Korea? Is there demonism? Demon-possessed people? People that are wildly out of their mind? And some. Those of you from Japan, you ever been to Kyoto? I mean, the ancient, Bonnie and I went to the ancient capital of Japan, and I went up and I asked the guide, I said, what's that? And they had piles of salt, like little pyramids. They were about this high. Salt, 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 salt. They said, that's the barrier so the spirits don't cross it. I said, that's the barrier so that the demons can. The prince of the power of the air does not like being talked about, the God of this world. We are so unaware of the spiritual wickedness in the world around us until you get involved in it. And when you get involved in ministry to them, and then you see that you're totally, when I was at Grace Community Church in California, John MacArthur would tell us the stories of the demonized, drug-addicted street people that would come into the church. They would come in a frenzy and screaming and foaming and doing all. I mean, Los Angeles has millions of people, and these people in the valley just kind of wander around, and you have to call the police, and the police will restrain them and take them away. And he challenged us. He says, how do you minister to people like that? Right here. To loose the bonds of wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens, to let the oppressed go free. What did Jesus constantly do? He had a crowd of people following him, and either they were sick, deaf, blind, unable to speak, or most often, what? Plagued by demons. That hasn't changed. We're surrounded by people that are plagued. What do you think some of these mass murderers, I mean, you might not have mass murders, but boy, we have them. We've had more this year in America than any other year. What would cause a person to walk into a grocery store and kill every person they see and bring enough stuff so they can throw that gun and start on another one? Well, let me ask you, what is Satan's goal of his existence? Jesus said in John 10, Satan came to kill, to steal, and to destroy. That's Satan's goals. He said, but I've come to give you life, and not just life, more abundant life, overflowing life, abundant life. So, Satan, Jesus. And that is really the heartbeat of compassion. God says you're surrounded by hurting people that Satan wants to kill and steal and destroy. And I want you to rest in me and deny yourself and reach them. Okay, so what is fasting? Fasting in the Old Testament was a biblical fasting, was an urgent call for the people to get serious about knowing God. Look what it says in verse 7. Is it not to share your bread with the hungry, that you bring in your house the poor that are cast out? When you see the naked, cover them. Don't hide yourself from your own people. Verse 8. Then your light shall break forth like the morning. Your healing shall spring forth speedily. Your righteousness shall go before you. The glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. All of these people tromping through Israel for all the centuries on the trade routes were supposed to come across these people that knew God, that knew they were hurting all the people around them, that had the same compassion God did, and they were reaching out to them. That was God's purpose for Israel. That was God's purpose for the temple. Remember, Jesus said, my Father's house was supposed to be a place of prayer for all the nations to come to. Did Israel do that? No. They made it so hard, nobody wanted to go there. You had to take so many baths and change your money and change your clothes, and you'd bring an offering and they'd say, it's not good enough, you got to buy ours. They just totally made it hard, and it wasn't God's way. So that's what the Old Testament was. Look what happens. Did you know in the New Testament, in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, 6, and 7, do you know what Jesus assumed? He didn't say, if you fast in chapter 6. He said, when you fast, when you pray, when you give alms. Jesus assumed, in the New Testament, we see biblical fasting was an ancient spiritual discipline to reschedule my life with God at the center. Now let me ask you, do you right now think constantly about how to make God central to everything? Or do you say, no, I'm in Word of Life right now. I'm trying to keep up with the assignments. And I wonder, when is that quiz going to be? And I'm wondering if I'm going to make the next payment. And when am I going to see my parents? And you know what I mean? We're constantly thinking about the little things of life rather than the big picture. God says when you fast, when you deny yourself, it's a time to reschedule your life with God at the center instead of dining. Many people's lives surround eating or relaxing or amusing, games and everything, or accumulating, that's making money, Or advancing, that's getting better and better in your career. Or securing your place in life. And a multitude of other things. By the way, they're not wrong. Is it wrong to eat? No. Is it wrong to relax? No. Is it wrong to amuse, to take your mind off of all the pressures? No. Is it wrong to accumulate? No. As long as it's not accumulating for yourself, Jesus said, but for him. But you know what all those things are? They're deadly to intimacy with God. I mean, they're deadly if they're not restrained, if there's not discipline. Okay, in the early church of the book of Acts and the Epistles, we see demonstrated this hunger for God. See, fasting is when I hunger for God more than for things. I have a hunger for God more than things. And so most of us, a time of fasting is a reset. In the early church, we see biblical fasting as a powerful way to yield every part of your life to the supremacy of Christ. So biblical fasting is an immediate way to declare your allegiance to God's way and to his glory for life.